Hello everyone! I finally got my hands on the Vader 4 Pro. I had a few problems where the customs refused my package, and that delayed the shipping time. But I finally got my hands on it. Better late than never. Flydigi boxes have become quite compact over time, and I like how neatly packed everything is on the Vader 4 Pro. Here's the Vader 4 Pro, and the dongle, which haven't changed much since then. On the design, it haven't changed much since the Vader 3 Pro. All of the buttons are still mechanical, from C and Z to the face buttons and the Dpad. The shutter buttons are super clicky and tactile, and the triggers are super smooth and they have a perfect resistance as well. The switch on the back can be used to change them to a clicky button. And the 4 back buttons are still super easy to press, just the same as the Vader 3 Pro. The grips are still made of plastic with a simple texture. And the biggest change are on the analog sticks. Similar to the Apex 4, you can now adjust the tension on the analog sticks by rotating these rings. The rings have small markings allowing you to adjust them equally. In the lowest setting, the rings are a bit loose. But I don't think anyone will be using those in the lowest setting. They become too sensitive. If you tighten it just a bit, the rings will become more stiff. And if you crank it to the max, the highest setting is a bit too tight. The ideal spot is in the middle, and you just crank it small notches from there. The capture and home button have now small labels indicating their functions, and we still have the connectors for the charging dock. The switch on the back can be used to change modes on the controller. And on the top we still have the charging port and the slot for the phone grip. Here are some comparisons with the Vader 3 Pro and the Apex 4. Ergonomically, these controllers have the same shape. One small detail is that on the Vader 3 Pro and on the Apex 4, you can remove the Dpad. But on the Vader 4 Pro, the Dpad is now fixed. Which is not a big deal since Flydigi never made replacement D-pads for this controller, and the silver D-pad from the Vader 3 Pro doesn't look that good here. And the face buttons retains the same quality. They have a good resistance and won't sink flat with the shell. The Vader 4 Pro has an RGB light strip just like the Vader 3. But the color transition is a bit worse. Maybe it's a bug. It's more smooth and subtle on the Vader 3. And when docked, a single LED shows the charging state. If you don't like the concave sticks, you can use this stick protector. They're a perfect fit and will make your sticks flat. Also, the sticks are still removable and you can use different heights. Testing on the Nintendo Switch, it can wake up the console. And it has motion controls. The back buttons are not configured out of the box. And the C and Z buttons are mapped to the buttons on the analog sticks. And it was a bit disappointing to see this, but the function button cannot be used to map the back buttons. On the Flydigi Direwolf 2, this button could be used with the back buttons to map a button or a macro on the go. This makes it much easier to use this controller. But unfortunately, on the Vader 4 Pro, you must take the controller to a computer to configure it. At least on the Apex 4, you can map the back buttons using the screen on the controller. Unfortunately, there is still not a way to configure macros. And it has been 6 months after the release of the Apex 4. So I'm not sure if they'll ever release this feature for the Vader 4 Pro. Moving to the PC tests, the Vader 4 Pro has no Deadzones at all. And no cardinal snapping too. The Circularity test is perfect. And the Dpad retains the Flydigi quality. It's one of the best Dpads in the market. The diagonals are easy to hit and the input is super consistent. You can push all the switches if you press it in the center, but Flydigi blocks hitting all 4 directions through software. And the triggers are also perfect. You can change it to analog or digital. Now let's look at the new features of the Vader 4 Pro in the PC Space app. The first thing I recommend is open function settings and enable quick switch configuration. This way you can switch between profiles by holding select and pressing A, B, X or Y. Here you can set the sleep timer for the controller. And there's a ton of configurations here. Let's start with the joystick rebounce algorithm. With this setting enabled, when you release the joystick, it returns to the center perfectly. without bouncing to the opposite direction. And when you disable it, it will mimic the joystick behavior accurately, bouncing back just a bit before it returns to the center. I recommend leaving this setting to off, because it works by adding a bit of delay to the stick input. I couldn't find any difference in the joystick center sensitivity options, so I'll skip this one. Changing the polling rate setting will reset your controller. It's better to leave the polling rate in the highest setting. A higher polling rate helps you get a lower input lag, but it also drains more battery from the controller. And this is probably my favorite. You can change the resolution of the analog sticks. In the lowest setting, you can see that the minimum step of the analog stick is 0.00780. But if we increase the resolution, the minimum step we get is 0.00050. I think this image will help you visualize this. With a higher resolution, there will be more steps registered, giving you more precision. With a bigger resolution, the stick will register small nuances of movement, giving you much more precision. And here's the joystick automatic calibration. With this option disabled, your sticks are calibrated only once, and every time you release the sticks, they will rest in a position slightly different. This is completely normal and expected, because the springs won't perfectly recenter your sticks every time. But with this option enabled, every time you leave your sticks untouched, the controller will automatically recenter it. This means that if your stick is a bit loose and you have a small amount of drift, the controller will automatically recenter, and the drift will be gone. I'd say that this option is more like a joystick filter. If you leave it disabled, all of the noise from the Hall effect sensors will be registered. Again, this is normal behavior because the sensors will detect tiny changes on the magnetic fields. But if you enable it, the noise will be filtered and you'll have a much more stable input. And pay attention that in order to the automatic calibration to work, you must have the joystick debounce enabled, because it won't be able to detect when the sticks are still with all that noise. Everything else from the app is the same of the other Flydigi controllers. Here you can quickly set up the back buttons. And you can add keyboard keys too. You can remap any button you want. And you can enable turbo, macro, and mouse functions. On the joystick tab, you can map the joystick to a keyboard or a mouse. You can set the sensitivity curve, enable a dead zone, or change to a compensation mode. And the same thing for the joystick edge. You can give it a dead zone, or change it to compensation, and the input will stop before reaching the end of the travel. You can finally change the circularity algorithm to be a circle or a rectangle. The rectangle mode though is not really a rectangle, but it gives you a bit more of range on the diagonals. You can configure gyro controls for shooting games or racing games. And you can link it to the mouse movement as well. Here you can set the dead zone of the triggers and the vibration intensity. And here you can configure the RGB settings. I recommend setting a different light to each profile. This way you can easily differentiate between them. And here you can test the vibration from the triggers and the grip. For the latency tests, this controller has already been tested and verified, and the results are on gamepadla.com. It has only 5 milliseconds of input lag with a wired connection. For reference, these are the fastest controllers so far. And with the Flydigi Game Center app on smartphones, you can even play games that does not support controllers. The app will map the buttons to touches on the screen, allowing you to play any kind of game. I covered this functionality on past controllers, and you can see them in full detail on the video linked here. Moving to the teardown, there is only 4 screws on the back. And you'll have to use some prying tool to open the back of the controller. The back shell is the same as the Vader 3 Pro. Here we have the 4 back buttons, and the magnets and the connectors for the dock. And on the mainboard, everything is nearly identical to the Vader 3 Pro, from the mechanism of the triggers to the board layout. The main difference is on the other side with the new analog sticks. The front shell has the exact same design, with rubber membranes for the face buttons and a small rubber protection for every other button. There are KL switches for the face buttons, and the triggers have a metal pivot. And here's the analog stick modules. They share a similar design to the Apex 4, with a spring that increases or decreases tension. The screw is tightened by the gears, and I think this is a pretty strong mechanism. It won't break unless you abuse it. Removing the rings, we can see the analog sticks, and here's another interesting detail. These sticks uses an internal restrictor, similar to what we've seen on the Beitong Zeus 2. This restrictor almost entirely reduces the friction on the edge of the analog stick. Circular motions feel super good on these sticks, almost like they're gliding. To continue, we'll have to remove these screws, and there's 2 more screws in here. Removing this structure reveals that Flydigi was very generous with lube on these analog sticks. But I have to say that the actual movement of these sticks feels slightly worse than the Apex 4. The Apex 4 uses bearings on its design, and thanks to that, the stick is almost completely free of any lube. The plastic parts have no contact with each other. But on the Vader 4 Pro, there is a lot of lube to reduce the friction between the plastic parts. And even with all that lube, there is more friction here than on the Apex 4. So the actual movement of the stick feels worse than the Apex 4. But the edges around the stick feel superior because of the internal restrictor. In the end, I still prefer the smoothness of the Apex 4, even though the Apex 4 has more friction on the external part of the sticks, because it doesn't have an internal restrictor like the Vader 4 Pro. This does not mean that the sticks on the Vader 4 Pro are bad. If you never touch the Apex 4, the Vader 4 Pro will feel amazing. In the end, if you have the Apex 4, you're not losing much. The Vader 4 Pro has a few extra tweaks for the analog stick, like the resolution and the Rebounce algorithm. The rings also makes it much easier to adjust the resistance of the sticks. But if you have any degree of OCD, then go with the Apex 4, because I found myself constantly changing the resistance of the sticks, trying to get that perfect calibration. With the Apex 4, you just set the resistance once and never mess with it again. And there is one problem with the Apex 4. If you tighten the sticks of the Apex 4 too much, there are chances of breaking the analog sticks. Flydigi responded that this is a problem with a single batch, and honestly, you should be good if you don't tighten your stick too much. But if you're not willing to take the risks, I'd say go with the Vader 4 Pro. The sticks on this one can only be tightened to a certain degree, being more safe. And here's my final thoughts for the Vader 4 Pro. Again, this is a serious candidate for Controller of the Year. I just wish it had more usability options, like a way to configure the back buttons without having to use the PC app. And that's it for today's review. I hope you have learned a few things you haven't seen before in my video. I tried to bring all the information I could from all other reviews to make this the definitive version. By the end of this year, I'll be ranking all controllers once again, but I have a few other controllers to test before that. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.